And I want to invite all of my panelists to please come camera on, and we can get started with our intros today. Christian, can you start us off?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, CoSensus and everyone for putting this together. My name is Christian Pinheiro. I am a community engagement specialist at the District Department of Transportation, or DDOT, as we're better known as. So we are the city agency that works on transportation. We maintain 1,400 miles of sidewalks, about 1,000 miles of roadways, 100 miles of bike lanes. We do everything from the curb to curb. In my particular division in community engagement, we work specifically on outreach and engagement with the DC community. So we work with residents, community groups, DC Council, and the mayor's office to advance our agency's policies and programs. And so we do all of that, as well as a lot of constituent service work to improve city services and advise our senior leadership on key policy priorities. So it's a really fast world. You know, we do a lot in the small team that we have, but it's a pleasure to be here. I really look forward to talking about this really important conversation.
Do you mind passing the mic to someone? Oh, or
yeah, I can go next. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this fireside chat. I'm super excited, and I want to thank you and say hi to all the audiences here and the panelists. So a little bit about myself. Like my name is Abhijit Srivastav. I go by Abhi, and I'm a senior associate at KPMG. My work is primarily focused on helping public and private organizations reach their sustainability goals and climate action plans through data and technology implementation. So and I have a background in architecture and city planning. So basically, I have done a lot of work in the New York City side and the tri-state area, helping towns, cities, states to reach their climate adaptation plans. Develop resiliency strategy, and just thinking about how we can improve the life of the people in the city, living in cities, better cities. Yeah, and I'll pass on the mic to Pooja.
Sure, thank you. Hi, pleasure to be here, and hello to everyone. My name is Pooja Jain. I'm with WSP. It's a consulting company that does everything built environment except for housing. And my role over there is SVP of Strategic Innovations. And also I'm part of the leadership team for the Climate Resilience and Sustainability business line at WSP. One of the key things that perhaps in the context of today's conversation that is relevant, and I do on a daily basis, is one thinking about planning for sustainable design in the context of urbanization and making it human-centric. And the other part, which maybe aligns a little bit with what Abhi you do, is technology is such a key and pivotal element in implementing a lot of what we want to do from a sustainably goals point of view. And I started a program called Emerge at WSP that actually consensus, how we met consensus actually. And it's we are scaling technologies that are absolutely essential for sustainable development and design. And usually we engage with emerging tech that are looking to really grow their footprint in this ecosystem. So I'm super excited to be here and for this conversation. Thank you.
And hi, everyone. I'm Zoe Siegel. I'm the Senior Director of Climate Resilience at Greenbelt Alliance. And Greenbelt Alliance is an environmental nonprofit located in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we do environmental and housing policy advocacy and engagement work. We believe that housing, building more housing in the right places is a really key is really key for the environmental agenda. And so we incorporate that into our environmental work, which is primarily focused on climate resilience related to preparing communities for the effects of sea level rise, extreme heat, and wildfires.
Great, thank you. I also just want to remind everyone that if any questions come up during the conversation, please drop them into the chat. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A to look through those. And the first question that I want to throw out there to everyone is, how does rapid urbanization affect communities? So this is something that I think about a lot within the context of the tech industry, but I'd really like to hear, with regards to all of your individual work and the sectors that you work between, how you think through this.
I can start, and Nicole. When we think about sustainability and urbanization, I think this dialogue of actually connecting the two is relatively new, and I'm so glad that it is becoming so mainstream now. I've spent about 23 years working wherever land meets water, and those are some of the most sensitive environments, and also ones that are going through a lot of urbanization lately. I think one of the key things that is top of mind for us is thinking about urbanization in the context of systems. A lot of times when urbanization or developments are approached, they're approached in a singular manner, but there is a growing movement towards thinking of these as systems of systems, as we think about one urbanization or a pocket of urbanization development in maybe the context of a city or a region, thinking about all the systems that come together, whether it be transportation, whether it be electrical systems, whether it be water systems, because these are all components of what would take for us to get to the sustainability goals that we want to look at. So really one of the things that I'm thinking about is it's almost like a systems engineering or systems design, systems planning, as opposed to looking at urban developments in their discrete individual forms.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I completely agree that, we need a system thinking when we're talking about cities, because when this rapid urbanization happens and when we are looking at solutions in silos, for example, cities are very complex and they have multiple agencies, multiple governing bodies focusing on their own sectors or discipline. So that has both positive and negative impact on our community. So it's really important to understand the connectivity between these two systems, and the stress of one system will impact the others, right? So we need to understand that complexity and the web interconnections between the two systems. So I'll give an example, like when we see a rapid urbanization, like a lot of people moving in the city for tourism or for like living, it creates a shortage of affordable housing, for example. Then cities need to think about it. So that's an impact on the community itself. But when you're just thinking about affordable housing, you also need to expand your network of school business. So you need to expand your green space infrastructure. So you can provide those services for the upliftment and the better living of those community. So solving one issue is not going to achieve sustainability for cities. So we have to continue the thought of it's a system of system thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And building on that, I think, there's definitely, pros and cons of rapid urbanization. And I think most of my work has been in the San Francisco Bay Area, where, rapid urbanization has led to displacement because, infrastructure like transportation and housing really haven't been able to keep up with the adequate demand. And you can't address these issues on a city by city scale. We really have to take a holistic look and address them as a region. And so every city can't just build housing to accommodate the region's housing needs. You have to really work holistically. And then, the same goes with sea level rise. We have 101 jurisdictions in the Bay Area, and sea level rise does not stop at jurisdictional boundaries. So, if one city is doing the right thing, it's not going to make a huge difference unless the cities surrounding it also kind of work together to really address sea level rise, together. I think there's also a lot of benefits of rapid urbanization if done right, though. It can create, new job opportunities. It can improve access to education, healthcare, and other essential services. And it can also serve to lift people out of poverty and really improve the quality of life. And it also can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and really create healthy communities. And so I think our goal should be to take to urbanize, but really focusing on the right ways to urbanize.
Yeah, totally. I think there's the dichotomy between how does proper urbanization look like, and how does basically bad urban planning really affect. There definitely are two different scopes for that. We've seen historical in the past, the bad histories of what poor urbanization could look like. I think of the Robert Moses era of the United States, building highways through communities, really setting forth the path of infrastructure first and not necessarily people and communities first. And there is overlap between both of those. And I think, to everyone's point, making sure that, sustainable urbanism is not just how do we move in a place that's clean and healthy, but like looking at public health, what effects of the health community, how does that play a role? Energy, they're all different factors, and they definitely have to tie in and coalesce for it to work. Because as Avi said, if everything's in a silo, we're not really going to get anywhere. We'll have effective components, but the entire machine would still not work effectively.
Yeah, and this is like a more like modern and balanced way or like approach towards sustainability. Like earlier, we had cities which were based on certain industry, like LA, like Hollywood. You have ports, so it became like a whole transportation hub, and then the city emerges. But now we are not looking into just one industry that can make a city. It's about the people who are living in the city and what the city has to offer them. And the people want everything. They want a clean air, they want access to public health, they want good education, they want social life. So we have to think about how can we design a sustainable city that attracts the people, because now we want a very balanced approach towards designing cities and planning cities.
Maybe to build on that, Abhi, I think one of the things that's transformed is that the power of information, right? The era that we are talking about, when cities popped up around a port or around, an industry, the information flow was very different at that time, right? Today we're living in an era where information is readily available, and that actually lends itself very positively to the idea of systems thinking also. Data is available, analytics is available. And what it does, it puts the power in the hands of those who are decision makers, who are designers, who are planners, who are strategists, to be making very informed decisions that can look at systems in their totality. And so it's a great era to be in, where all that technology is now available. It's a matter of harnessing it in the right way, where all the stakeholders are coming together and looking at the big picture together to be making decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Like we in cities, we need to leverage the data and technology. I think like it's at the core for any type of development or sustainability, or reaching towards like resiliency and adaptation. Thinking about, like we have a complex system of building infrastructure. We need to collect all the data about the greenhouse gas emissions from that, so that we can reduce the overall impact on climate, using the emission data that we collect. So that's one example. But yeah, definitely the data and technology is at the core, where that can drive towards sustainability.
I wanted to dig. Oh, sorry, Zoe. Were you going to say something?
No, go for it.
Okay, well, I wanted to bring it back to a point that you had brought up, Zoe, earlier about displacement, and wanted to dig into that a little bit deeper and discuss kind of what are some ways you all see as ways that are needed to mitigate the displacement that happens as a result of rapid urbanization in cities.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, one thing that happens, related to displacement in the context of climate change is, as we are, trying to make our communities more resilient, maybe to sea level rise or extreme heat, adding in, urban greening or, shoreline infrastructure, bike lanes, that kind of thing. Those, oftentimes go hand in hand with, signifying gentrification. And so, you'll have, people that have, designers or urban planners that have, the best of intent coming into a community to, make that community more resilient to the effects of climate change. And actually, if not done in a sensitive way, can actually serve to, cause some friction in that community. I think, one way to address that really is to, work with, even if as designers or planners or architects, we know what should be done, really working with the community to make sure that these are projects that are really, driven by the community and a reflection of what the community believes their needs are, in addition beyond, what the data says. On another scale level, I think, ways that we can kind of mitigate displacement are, on the housing side of things, tenant protections, just building more housing overall, and more affordable housing. And then, there's some innovative solutions like community land trusts. And land trusts can serve both on the housing side, but also on the land side. So you could have a land trust that is also, absorbing, sequestering carbon and, absorbing floodwaters, and, serving that cross-jurisdictional boundary to sort of really, create a resilient, a resilient district across different communities. Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think, it's it's interesting because I think we're in a pivotal time for this type of conversation. I think one way of addressing that is having those open and frank conversations. Zoe mentioned, making sure the community is involved and invested in decision making. But also making sure actors ourselves, like, in a public government agency, we have a history of, we're not nimble enough, we can't be flexible with understanding, the other components of working with private sector groups or nonprofits or communities in that level. And so there's room for us to grow in that. And I think we've seen some good positive change with that. We have an administration at USDOT, for example, it's been very on the forefront of looking at policies that are driving kind of this multimodal sustainability path, where historically agencies in that capacity have been very, big on what's the shiny new, highway that we can have a nice ribbon cutting for and celebrate, this grand project, which, those are important. But like in the grand scheme of things, when we're thinking of climate change, we're thinking of sustainability, how can we divert some of those areas? And, I think there's been some good movement, the Cross Bronx Expressway in New York, for example, which many of you probably are familiar with, that there's been some ongoing community involvements and workshops that began last month about how we can reevaluate that area. And it was lucky enough to get, one of the $2 million raised grants from USDOT to initiate that from the federal government side. And so having that conversation, looking at government entities and other private partnerships, for example, that could work in a collaborative manner to kind of undo the wrongs we've done in the past is definitely, it's not easy. It's probably the hardest of all the other options we have, but it's definitely can have the biggest impact for sure.
Yeah, I would agree, Christian. It's just so hard, right? Solving these problems is just, it's probably easy to talk, but it's very, very hard to solve these problems. And the whole idea of displacement, we see it everywhere, right? Wherever we see, wherever we see growth. I mean, I'm taking San Francisco as an example. Zoe, you live over there. We've seen the Mission District kind of like change. If we look at Mission District 15 years ago versus what it looks today, they're absolutely not recognizable, or they don't look like each other at all. And there is an element of culture that it also gets displaced. It's not just the people, it's also culture that gets displaced when people get displaced. And in that context, I love that area, by the way. It looks beautiful. I also love what it was back in the day when I was a student at Cal, and we would go there for some of the best Mexican food, Hispanic food, and the cultural experience. And I miss that, while I also enjoy all the urbanization that has happened in that area. So it's kind of like it's almost a balance, or the word dichotomy that was used earlier, Christian, I think you used it, is it's while we are thinking of people, there's also a displacement of culture that happens, a displacement of experiences that happens. And I'm not an expert in this. And, Nicole, you guys are really doing this work of gathering information and, making sure all voices are heard. But how do you even acknowledge those that are going to get displaced? How do you get them into the loop of the dialogue and getting their feedback? Or once the urbanization has happened and those people have gotten displaced, how do you acknowledge their voices in kind of thinking about what could be brought back? And maybe it may have been relevant to the history of that area where the urbanization process happened, or maybe a subcategory of a gentrification happened. Again, I'm not an expert in these, but these are observations just from personal experiences of visiting certain parts 15 years ago and visiting them now and experiencing them very differently.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with everyone. And the way like cities can approach to mitigate the issue of displacement is through all the policies that the city implements. For example, like if you're designing streets, then complete street is something that is inclusive. You want to have space for pedestrians, you want to have space for bikers, you want to have space for public transportation and for cabs, taxis, vehicles, right? Uh, I think like it's all about inclusiveness and the voice of the community, what they want in their city. And then when I mean they is like everyone in the community, uh, just without like any bias or at any scale. And also like the the policies that can preserve the cultural component, the historic component. Uh, that I think like that's extremely crucial to keep that sense of place. So the people still feel that they belong to the place and they have connection to the place, they have relation to the place. So that really helps for people to stay and create like a more sense of uh, belonging for community. So I think having these type of policies which protect people rights, which give more opportunities to community to put their voice together, mixed use public transportation, if the cities and the government agencies are planning to have like more inclusive policies, I think then it is good for the community.
Yeah, and I think there's a definite, climate impact to displacement as well, because if
Yeah.
you are, if you're displaced from your community, maybe you still live 50 miles away now, and you have to commute to go to your church, to go to your job, to go visit your friends, and so that's a significant more amount of driving that happens in more greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think there's a real urgency to address displacement for a climate perspective. And that's why at Greenbelt Alliance we're really focused on housing really as a strategy for mitigating effects of climate change. And I think on an economic level, we need to increase economic opportunities for people of all income levels. We need to promote higher wages so people can afford the housing as it gets more expensive.
Yeah, I think climate change is and the environmental justice is now like one of the biggest concern. Um, I see like along the Hudson River or the areas which are under the flood zone, they have like a really high flood insurance now, and that is definitely uh, making people like to move out to a flood safe zone because first of all, like the insurance is high, they don't want to take risk, but at the same time, who can afford to pay those of higher flood insurance? Now all those rich people are at the edge of Hudson River, for example. So all those like rich waterfront properties are now being occupied by like rich people, and then the people who can't afford um, the flood insurance or take the risk of flooding are now moving out. So this is the some type of, like we don't want our waterfront just for the rich people. So definitely we need to have like those policies where we can protect the rights of the people or the people who already live there, existing communities.
Yeah, this kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about next, which is a massive, it's just going to be a massive question, but it also kind of is what we're already starting to discuss, which is what are the many different ways that urbanization is affecting our environment and that we're seeing that play out.
I think for us in the District of Columbia, you know, we're a fairly small area, about 68 square miles, and we have to fit, you know, a metro area that consists of 2 states and you know, commuters coming from possibly, you know, other regions in the East Coast. And so when we think about sustainability in terms of how do we meet capacity for that, because, you know, the land area of where we're at in the DC area, mid-Atlantic, is only so big, and we have to make sure we're strategizing to make our networks kind of complement what that is. And so what does that look like in terms of, you know, whether it's investing more in transit, investing more in multimodal transportation, just to give people the option. And I think that's a big tool here, because, you know, a lot of shifting minds, especially in the transportation field, involves a lot of behavioral economics. You know, you can put down asphalt, you can put down a bike lane, you can make a bus only lane, you know, downtown, and it means nothing if people don't know the benefits of that, or you know, if you can't encourage that type of behavior for them to mode shift. And that's been something that we've, you know, at DDOT, we're really big on, and making sure we're having a multimodal plan. We do have our Move DC publication, which is our 25-year master plan that we look at until 2045 on how we
I don't know.
variety of factors. So yeah, there's a lot that we can think about in terms of maxing capacity. But of course, you know, it's different in every region, and you know, there are different other factors when you think of geography and things that play a role.
Yeah, maybe another lens of that I can add to what Christian just described is, when we think of urbanization, just from the context of maybe developments, right? We see a new community coming up at a waterfront and all. Historically, when we thought about the impact, we always thought about the impact of climate on those developments, but now we are thinking the other way around, which is what is the impact of those developments to the environment? So historically, we designed, let's say if something was on the waterfront, and again, I take the example of San Francisco, it has a lot of urban waterfront to it. If there was a new high rise that was going to come up, people thought about, well, what's the sea level rise parameters? If you're close to the water, what should we really be designed for? Make sure we are good for the next, 50 years. That's the design life of our asset. Now the thinking is more around, well, what do I have to do in my planning and design to make sure that this asset actually has a positive impact on the environment? And some of maybe the more nitty gritty here, but thinking about what kind of electricity am I using for the operations of my asset? Is it renewable or not? Do I have proximity to that? Can I install a cogen? What kind of construction materials are getting used? Are they low carbon? Can I take advantage of materials that sequester carbon? So there has been a fundamental maybe shift in thinking about, it's not about how the environment impacts the urban pieces, but in fact, how the urban pieces actually impact the environment, and thinking about them early on to make sure that those assets have a long-term positive impact on the environment. Are they well connected with the transportation system? Christian, you just talked about that. And maybe there's some coordination with the cities and whatnot to be thinking about making that accessible, or making the right transportation modes accessible to those urbanization efforts that are going on. But there's so many pieces that are in the dialogue now when it comes to the impact to the environment, and it's a really positive. This is also driving, I feel like, a lot of the innovation engine in the country right now. We're seeing a lot of innovation in renewable energy, grid resiliency, low carbon materials, and whatnot. And I do hope that really takes off and gives a million options to every time somebody thinks of urbanization. The excuse is not we don't have options. The excuse, it's more like, well, we have so many options. What can I choose?
Yeah, and I think, there's also an element of, a more efficient use of resources when we have our urbanization. Urban areas often require, less resources for housing and transportation than, say in rural areas, which means we can really use our resources more efficiently and leave more land available for, natural habitats and agricultural production. Something that, my organization has done for many years is promote urban growth boundaries around cities. It might be more of a California thing than a New York thing. I'm not entirely sure, but we really want to encourage, dense development in cities, and then really protecting open spaces around the cities, both for, wildfire buffers, for ecological protection, and for, recreational purposes. And I think by preserving natural areas, we can, really, increase our, sequester carbon, and really increase the biodiversity, which provides, important elements to our ecosystem, and, air purification, and recreation, and that kind of thing. So, we're really hoping we can both, urbanize and protect our open spaces at the same time.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of urban growth boundaries, infill development, mixed use development. I think those are some of the key aspects where we can really use these policies and programs just to protect our natural habitat, natural forest land, natural agricultural land. So see, cities as coming back to like system of system thinking, and cities are a complex system. We see that the data shows that 70% of the people would be living in cities by 2050. So cities are definitely at the epicenter, and that's all urbanization. And cities contribute almost like 70% of the entire greenhouse gas emissions. So how do we reduce that? Definitely, we need to take more approach towards protecting the natural habitat that we have, and that happens by implementing the urban growth boundary, promoting more infill development, promoting uh, high density cities, public transportation, transit oriented development. So all those are key where we can have a more epicenter of people living and save most of the natural habitat and the natural land. But at the same time, we need to have like a more balanced approach, because when we have this rapid growth, and we discussed just a few minutes ago, it also creates a lot of issues. Like if there's a flooding in the cities, it causes like urban heat island effect. uh, it also causes like air pollution, so health impacts. So all of that aspects also come that we need to factor in. So to create like more sustainable cities, we need to think about how are we mitigating all those negative impacts. So clean energy, how are we having these pockets of green neighborhoods where it can have like promote better air quality, how we can have like a better waste management system, how we can have like more efficient use of resources and clean water for everyone in the city. So I think like we have done a really good job in creating more densities, and now we have to take a step further to optimize and make all those resources and functions more efficient.
Yeah, and I think, how we build more housing in the context of sea level rise and wildfire is, a really challenging issue right now. As we're talking about, along the shoreline, there's still a lot of development happening. If you take Miami, for example, I mean, the city of Miami acts like, sea level rise is not happening. They're building, along the shoreline, and people are moving in, not really acknowledging the impending risk of flooding to the community. And I think it's a challenge because, there's, in order to make a shoreline more resilient, you need a lot of money, and building more dense development can really fund that. And so, public-private partnerships like building housing are going to be, some of the tools that we can really, make our shorelines more resilient. And how you do that in a way that protects the future and current residents, I think is really important. And then, the wildfire context, it's something that we're going to people that live in high wildfire severity zones are losing insurance really quickly. And so the people that can afford to live in those places are the ones that can probably afford to rebuild without even needing insurance. And so you have this dichotomy of people living, like I think when there were wildfires in Los Angeles last year, you had celebrities like Kim Kardashian just hiring their own fire departments and that kind of thing. And then that's not something that, an individual can really do. And so thinking about where we build our housing and how we can protect those communities, and for wildfire, building housing in existing communities and away from open spaces where we can create wildfire buffers is something that's really important to do.
So I would like to ask, what do you all think is needed in order to reduce some of these impacts on the environment? I know we've kind of already led into this, but also tying it back into what was mentioned earlier about how this is all like a system of systems, and all of the key is kind of how all of these things are interconnected with each other. So framing it that way, what is still needed in order to like reduce the impacts of urbanization on the environment?
I would say the number one thing we can do is just build more housing in the right places. More housing is more energy efficient, it's more water efficient, people will have to commute less, and we can really create healthy communities around that.
Yeah, I would say, really, I think we are evolving our thinking around actually thinking of this as a system of systems. We know how housing, commercial real estate, generally urbanization, even development of transportation system, electrical system, energy systems and all, the way they happened, they still do happen quite a bit in their siloed approach. Just in the Bay Area, Zoe, how many transportation agencies are there? 27, 33, I don't know, I don't keep count, right? So just within one sector, there's so many agencies that are have a voice, and they're all operating and coming together in this one San Francisco city. So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of work to be done in that systems of systems thinking approach. It is happening. I think data analytics is driving a lot of it. It's bringing all those pieces together for the forefront in a way that's actually consumable. I think one of the challenges in the past has been this problem is so big that even to think about it in a way that it's understandable to the various stakeholders has been very, very hard. I think the power is there today to be able to present it in a manner that it is actually consumable by different stakeholders who care about different things and can see their piece and the impact of their piece or the impact to their piece in a way that's easily understandable, and then they can respond to it. So I think there's a lot more work to be done in this space, yet I think the pieces are there for the response to happen.
Yeah, I think that, I agree with everything there. I think that it is complex. Pooja mentioned it right. This is not a one size silver bullet solution. It would definitely require a lot of coordination, but I definitely am a firm believer that advocacy does have merit. There's a lot of grassroots efforts that are really important when it comes to talking about this dialogue. And for example, like the Times Square pedestrian plaza project that was under former Commissioner Jeanette Sadi-Khan, who wrote a fantastic book called Street Fight, which I recommend you all read. It's a fantastic book that kind of talks about the inner workings of redesigning cities and how we can make them more livable and thriving, and kind of that challenge of public sector fights with the community. But doing something like that in a very piecemeal fashion, while in the long term it's very arduous, does gain that community support over time. And now, of course, it's become a permanent piece, which I feel like is kind of now part of the Manhattan landscape. When people go to Times Square, they know that that's, a place that is for people, that they can, talk to vendors and do shopping and not have to worry about competing with cars and traffic all the time. And we've done that a lot of work in DC as well. We our Open Streets program that we had that initiated in 2019 was one of these things. We're just, we'll test it out, we'll see how it goes. We've seen the success it has in other cities like Bogota and Colombia that really kind of spearheaded this whole Open Streets movement. And so much now, in 2023, we've garnered a lot of support, thanks to, Mayor Bowser and her leadership. That's something that now is part of what we do. And now we have pop-ups throughout the city. And so, something starting as small as bringing it up in the conversation, and then it can turn into legislation and policy change. It's a long road, but it definitely has that impact that, we can see in many cities, for examples.
Yeah, it would be a dream to get those 37 DOT agencies come together to work on a single solution. But yeah, no, again, like the system and inclusivity, I think data and technology has a key role to play in that, because every agencies have their own structure, their own budget, their own solutions, and their own goals, right? We need more dynamic approach versus like the linear approach that we have. So we talk about, like, for example, climate change, flooding happened, then what are the secondary impacts of flooding, like how it can affect the supply chain, or how it can affect people reaching to their medical supplies, or how it can cause like waterborne disease. So we need to have like more dynamic modeling of primary, secondary, and tertiary impacts. And then once we have that approach, we need to put the voices together of all what the 37 transportation agencies want, what the community wants, and what would be like the different secondary and tertiary impacts of those solutions or those project would be. I think it's really hard to convey that story because we are thinking in linear and every agency is thinking about their own systems. But if we put them together using the data and technology, I think we will have a very compelling story, and we can really make this project happen in a more sustainable and balanced way.
Yeah, and I would also say it's really important to get involved at the local level. We can have all the data and do all the advocacy that we want, but if the right elected officials are not in charge, they're not going to make they're not going to listen to the facts and the people, and they're not going to make the right informed decisions. And so, oftentimes there's a lot of focus on kind of like national politics, but really so much decision making happens at the local level, and it's really critical to really make sure that your electeds are do have your best thoughts in mind.
Yeah. And I think that's where CoSensus, your tool, comes in, getting all the voices together and telling that story of what the community needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have about 9 minutes left. I want to use it for some Q&A just before we wrap up. Open it up to Q&A with the last few minutes here. Okay, this kind of connects to something that Pooja had brought up about stakeholders and the importance of getting stakeholders to be buying in and like also aware of what's going on. And I'm wondering, what are some obstacles you faced as it relates to getting stakeholders, internal or external, to buy in to more sustainable practices, whether that's around like bringing awareness to the like more sustainable options. I know that's something that you talked about earlier, Christian, or what are some other obstacles around this?
Yeah, certainly. I'll kick it off. In our role in DDOT, at the community engagement team, that's pretty much what we do every day, is try to, make sure that the public is aware of what we're doing and how that's going to impact it, whether it's, a project in their neighborhood or kind of a citywide network issue that, we want to make sure that their voices are being heard. And so it is a challenge because I feel like there are enclaves of individuals and communities within cities that still feel that everything, like if their well-being is going to be challenged or their way of life and lifestyle has to change for this one small percentage of the population is going to use a bike lane, for example, they take it very personal. And, it's not, there's no fault to them for that. But in the greater scheme of things, it does create layers of barriers, because in order for us to be active community engagement, and outreach, members of our own cities, we have to make sure we're hearing both of those sides. And there are times that we can run into the issue of what I call paralysis by analysis, where we kind of keep going and reevaluating the same thing over and over again, because there's multiple voices kind of pushing and tugging, and there has to be a time where we have to eventually move forward and actually build. So that's probably the hardest thing to do, is building that consensus. But I think always bring it back to the narrative, right? Making sure that we're storytellers, issuing the importance of what we're doing, and the overall goal, the return on investment that communities will see if these things are taken into action, and that we are here to make sure that we are trying to see the fruits of our labor. And so, we've done small things like, low-hanging fruit in terms of just like putting in a lane and that connects to a trail, making sure that those network pieces are being solidified to give people an understanding of this is what a connected community can feel like. And we always like to say, indeed, that all the easy bike lanes have been made. It's all the challenging ones that are still up and coming. And of course, this is beyond bike lanes as well. That's just, something that was really pertinent to me and the community that I'm in. But yeah, I think it definitely takes a village, I'll say, and make sure that, for anyone who's interested moving forward, being a steward in your own community and advocating, and then, pulling people up to make sure that they are also vocalizing their issues and their concerns. Once it becomes a wide scope movement, it's kind of its own animal at that point. So we can take off.
Yeah, Christian, thank you for sharing that. I think one of the other things of the of stakeholder engagement and difficulties around it is sometimes it's not about that they're not on board. Sometimes it's about their ability to actually do what is being asked of them, right? Case in point, electrification, right? There is a big movement towards it, but we also know that some of the major utilities actually don't have the capacity to serve all the electrification needs, right? So it's not about them not being on board. It's actually recognizing that perhaps for everything that is to be achieved by 2030, 2035, particularly in California, where, there's all kinds of things that, about electric cars and et cetera. Just recognizing that sometimes it's not about stakeholders not being on board, but there are other frictions that need to be overcome, and they're related to capacity. And what is it that needs to be done to build that capacity? So our microgrids in the context of this example, are microgrids some solutions that can intervene while the capacity is being built? So I think we have to think about stakeholders from not just the point of view of them being on board, but also recognizing the limitations and the capacity issues that some stakeholders may experience, and being at the table in a problem-solving scenario, as opposed to saying, well, this is your job, why aren't you doing it? Well, we recognize what the issues are, well, let's solve it together.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add on to that is to, make sure that like the community and the local government or planners or consultants are really building the relationships before there's a need to weigh in. I think there's can be a lot of distrust between local government and communities, and if we can kind of bridge those barriers before there's a moment where input is needed, it can serve to make the engagement smoother.
Yeah, also like just one addition to that is also a part of educating is like we as a consultant, as a planners, as a city designer, have to educate the communities as well. What is possible? What is the capacity? And that way, you can really come to a solution where you can include all the multiple stakeholders and develop like how that's going to be possible, whether it is just through public-private partnership or whatever your approach is. But then just giving an example that is working on a Buffalo downtown redevelopment, and the community wanted, like, they want a Manhattan in downtown Buffalo. The it's not a capacity for the city to have that. So educating them what is possible, what is the capacity, how much we can do, what are the policy. I think as our job is like to to communicate that, to make a balanced and understanding between all the different stakeholders to come to a solution is also extremely critical.
Thank you so much for those responses. I fully agree with so many of the things that were just said about creating more room for these conversations to be taking place. We're basically at time, so I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today and talking through these things. And I want to also say thank you to everyone who joined in to listen. And we'll close it at that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for hosting.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for
hosting. Thank
hosting.
you.
Well, appreciate you.
Bye.